All right, so I am Daniel Greason. I'm just gonna see, is there still an echo? Okay, now we should be good. Okay, I'm Daniel Greason with CWA District 1, Local 1104, our education division, which represents teaching assistants, research assistants, graduate assistants. One of our mottos is SUNY works because we do. We're hosting this panel on fascism, working class struggle, and class resistance today. And as we noted in our invitation, the latest CWA convention unanimously voted yes for the resolution, quote, a general fight for our freedoms, end quote, in which the union declared resisting authoritarian rule a primary objective of our union, resolved to stand up against attacks against labor and dedicate resources to, quote, institute widespread popular education, end quote, for the workers in our union on these topics. Following these decisions, we meet today to discuss fascism and working class resistance. The parallels today between historical fascism and what is happening today in the US and other parts of the world are highlighted by many, and I believe will be elaborated on more by our great panelists today. Understanding fascism, though, can be hard because of various reasons. One might make the mistake of expecting all historical elements to be repeated, or too many of them. One might be thought to be too alarmist or not alarmist enough. One might make mistakes distinguishing between liberal bourgeois democracy and fascism, either failing to recognize or exaggerating continuities or discontinuities of repressive governance between historical fascism and liberal democracies before and since. All these discussions have value, but today we want to open up as a labor union with the simple suggestion that fascism represents a form of class rule under capitalism, and that this class rule neither disappeared nor remained completely the same after historical fascism. Underlying the repression unleashed on society today, we see repression against the working class, attempts to subjugate the working class further and deeper to the rule of capitalist class. And also why today's resistance must be a working class struggle. Today, maybe more openly than ever in a long time, the regime we face represents a class regime. Not only do an unprecedented number of billionaires sit at high cabinet positions, including, of course, the president, but the policies and attacks should be understood in this pro-business, anti-worker perspective. A very telling example is when Trump admitted he spoke to oil companies and not Congress before the imperialist intervention in Venezuela. The aim of this monopoly rule is to increase police power and militarization, attack working class organizations like unions, increase repression and attacks on immigrants, increasingly criminalize political opposition, and target even the most basic democratic institutions, including voting rights. Historically, the most effective resistances against social and political repression and the most significant democratic gains for the exploited masses under capitalism have always involved organized working class power. Today, then, we believe that we cannot afford to be drawn back to limited workplace fights, but must pave the way for the working class to assert itself as a class politically. That's why we gathered this panel today. We're looking forward to hearing from our panelists and discussing these issues with you, which hopefully will be only one of many other upcoming discussions. And without further ado, we will introduce our panelists today. So I believe first up is Steve. Yeah, you want to introduce?
Yeah. Okay, so our first panelist and speaker is Steve Zeltzer. So Steve is a member of CWA Pacific Media Workers Guild. He's a labor journalist, videographer, and host of Workweek Radio. Steve is also a supporter of the United Front Committee for a Labour Party, which is a group of labor militants working towards the foundation of a mass labor party that is founded and run democratically by the workers themselves. So Labor Video, channel that Steve hosts, has been producing working class coverage from not only the US but all around the world since 1983. And it is an exemplary and inspiring source of labor journalism that everyone should definitely check out. Steve is also a supporter and member of the Labor for Palestine Network. It's a network launched in 2004 by New York City Labor Against War and Al-Awda NY, the Palestine Right to Return Coalition, to reclaim the legacy of working class solidarity with Palestine in the US, endorsing the Palestinian-led boycott, divestment, and sanctions picket line that demands an end to the occupation and apartheid in Palestine, full equality for all, and Palestinian refugees' right to return to their homes and lands from which they were expelled. We'd also like to thank Steve for being instrumental in working with us to set up this panel from the get-go. Yeah, and a lot of the credit for the initiative goes to him. So with that, Steve, take us away.
Okay, well, thank you very much. And I want to thank your local, particularly for hosting this, because as far as I know, this is the first union local to organize a discussion about fascism and what it is and how to fight it and how working people can challenge it. And at the last CWA convention that I was at, there was a debate about repression authoritarianism. That's what they called it, and particularly defending DEI. And our union had a lot of discussion. I videotaped it, some of the discussion, and said that they wanted to defend DEI in union contracts. So if companies tried to get rid of it, you would be able to keep it in your union contracts. So I think that was an important debate and discussion. But it really didn't go into what is causing fascism. Is it just Trump? Is it an individual thing, or is it a system problem of the capitalist system? And we have to say today there are opposition to some of the things going on in the United States. The CNA, the National Nurses Union, is having a national day of action against ICE at hospitals all over the country. And this is the first union, I think, that's organized a national action against ICE that should be replicated. Also, the ILWU is the other national union that actually put out a statement on fascism, which I think is important. It doesn't call for independent working class action against fascism, but does say that we face fascism in the United States. So I want to focus really on a couple of things. One is that the causes of fascism in the post-war period, because as Americans know, the United States was a victor in the Second World War, and it had all the gold. Most of the world was destroyed. The industrial centers of most of the world were destroyed. So the United States was able to set up the economic structure, Bretton Woods, and also economic organizations like the WTO and the World Bank, and basically set up a capitalist framework for stabilization of capitalism and imperialism in the post-war period. And this crisis now is that all these institutions are basically falling apart, being disassembled, and being destroyed. So the whole post-war economic structure has come unglued. And of course, one of the reasons for this is wars that have taken place around the world. One of the wars that we were involved in, it was in Iraq, in Syria and Libya, in attacking those countries. And one of the results of those wars was mass migration. In fact, they were the largest migration since the Second World War. 6-7 million workers, people from those countries flooded in, and I saw this in Syria, flooded through Syria into Germany, into other parts of Europe. And what did that bring about? One of the things it brought about was a rise of fascism in Germany. This mass migration led to the growth of right-wing and fascist parties in that period. And I think that we have to look at the rise of fascism in the post-war period first with the rise of fascism in Europe, and also its reflection in the United States with Trump and fascist forces that have been supporting Trump. And of course, one of the programs of the fascist in the United States has been Project 2025, which was for the destruction of all public education, public services, public health care, and for eliminating democratic rights for working people in the United States. And I think that this is part of the crisis that labor has faced, because although the unions in the United States opposed Project 2025, there was no campaign to educate workers about what Project 2025 was. It was mainly support Harris and support the Democrats. That was their main focus, which was obviously not successful. So when we look at Trump and what he did with the attempted insurrection and attempted coup, people say, well, that's something new. But actually, in 1933, a retired Marine General Smedley Butler was actually approached during the middle of the Depression to carry out a coup using veterans in the United States. And he went public with it to Roosevelt. And Roosevelt at that time was being called the communist, like Obama was called the communist by these fascist forces. Roosevelt was called the communist. And he went public and there was a hearing. So there was no mass movement in the United States for fascism. Today we have a civil conditions, for example, of internecine warfare in the capitalist class, where the Republicans are saying that they should kill and murder their opponents, their political opponents in Congress, put them in jail. This internecine warfare in the capitalist class in the United States actually is the first since the American Civil War. There hasn't been a situation like that in the United States since the Civil War, where the capitalists were fighting with each other and threatening each other with death and jail. So the hegemony, and if we look at the hegemony of the United States after the Second World War, one of the reasons they were able to get hegemony is that they had an anti-communist purge in the working class in the United States. The corporations, the trade union bureaucracy, and the government worked together to support the formation of the AFL-CIO, which was formed as a pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist trade union federation. And the CWA was part of that. It purged out leftists and basically worked with the AFL-CIO to operate internationally with the CIA. So the AIFLD, which Asian Institute of Foreign Labor Development, was set up, and the AFL-CIO, including the CWA, were involved in the overthrow of the government in Chile, and they set up later the Solidarity Center, AFL-CIO Solidarity Center, which is a arm of the AFL-CIO funded almost solely by the National Endowment for Democracy, USAID, and it's actually received over $1 billion. A lot of money. $1 billion has gone to the Solidarity Center at the AFL-CIO, which has never made a full report on what it's doing. And it is now, and this is news to a lot of people, it's just been refunded by the Trump government. The Trump administration approved refunding the National Endowment for Democracy, and $70 million a year will be going to the AFL-CIO Solidarity Center. And this Solidarity Center has been involved working with Israel in training so-called AFL-CIO people internationally around the world. And they've gone to the Histadrut, they support the Histadrut, and they, unfortunately, at the CWA convention, they passed a resolution supporting the Solidarity Center in the international operations. One thing we have to say is American workers, the CWA, all unions cannot fight the capitalists in this country, the bosses, by supporting their political agenda internationally. And I am against taking any funding from the government for its international operations. And I would have to say that the fact that the AFL-CIO is taking money now from the Trump administration, which approved this funding, really should raise questions among other kind of workers. What exactly operation is this, and why would the Trump government be funding it? So what has brought this economic crisis in the United States to a head? A couple of things. One is the policy of American capitalism and all capitalism is to increase profits. And in the post-war period, early post-war period, the unions were at a high point of organization. 35% of workers, 35% were in unions. So what the capitalists did is they wanted to increase the profits. And they did that by several policies. Deregulation was a policy of the Democrats and Republicans. In fact, Carter started the deregulation of the FAA with Alfred Kahn, the airlines, privatization of public services, and outsourcing, leading to independent contractors, making everyone an independent contractor in the working class, or as many people as possible. And that helped weaken the labor movement. And then we had, which is very important in looking at the rise of fascism in this country, is deindustrialization, a policy of deindustrialization to move industry from Detroit, from the Midwest, from Pennsylvania to the South, to Mexico, and then Asia and China. And this has had a devastating impact. In fact, the capitalists used to say in the United States, we don't want a national industrial policy. You should go where you make your most profits. And of course, going where you make the most profits means go to cheap labor, go to other countries where there are no unions or cheap labor. And that's exactly what's happened in the last 40, 50 years. And the Democrats were a key player in this. Carter, as I said earlier, supported deregulation of the airlines. Clinton supported NAFTA. I remember him going to a UAW convention in San Diego and telling the UAW delegates at that convention, you may not like the fact that I support NAFTA, but you're going to take it. And they all clapped him. So here you have a union that's an industrial union supporting Clinton, who wanted to basically outsource their jobs to Mexico and other countries. So this privatization and NAFTA, outsourcing of labor in the United States, was a bipartisan policy of the Democrats and Republicans. And it went alongside with imperialist intervention of the AFL-CIO and the Solidarity Center in South Africa and in many other countries. So the unions could not fight this because of their politics. To fight deregulation, to fight privatization, to fight outsourcing, you need to politically educate workers about why it's happening, who's behind it. And that means a fight not only against the Republicans, but the Democratic Party. And the unions, like the Teamsters, when trucking were deregulated, there was no national campaign against deregulation of trucking. It would have meant fighting the Democrats. So there was no challenge. And what you had is, with this deindustrialization in the United States, is a terrible thing called the Rust Bowl. And what was that? I mean, Rust Bowl has meant for the working class that they have no future. The destruction of the industrial base in the United States meant that literally millions of workers in industrial towns throughout the Midwest were left without jobs and no future. Their children left. It was a terrible situation, which still continues in large parts of that area. And the Democrats had no solution to it. So one of the things that happens with the rise of fascism is you have populist people who say that they can defend the working class, that they have a program. And one of the things that we saw in the United States was Ross Perot, the great sucking sound. He said, we have to stop of industry going to Mexico. And of course, Trump also said that he was going to stop the outsourcing of America. That was one of his populist campaign policies that he had. And tariffs, because one of the things that happens with the decline of capitalism and inter-imperialist competition is you have tariffs and trade war. And the reality is that this trade war now that we're in is not a result of Trump. The United States has been more and more in a trade war, and sanctions have been one example of it. Sanctions on countries to try to weaken them and force them to accept colonial domination. So the other aspect that we're in now is the rise of techno-fascism. Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison, Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Alex Karp, these techno-fascists who have used AI and used technology to enhance their wealth, but also to steal data and to use AI to destroy the working class and to eliminate workers. And they have now run the U.S. government. They were put in charge of the U.S. government, Musk, and to basically cut back public workers, destroy public workers, and use AI to get rid of as many workers as he could. Large number of workers have lost their jobs. And you have not just a rise of fascists in the United States who were put in power by Trump, but also they are organizing internationally to support fascism globally. So they're supporting Orban in Hungary. They're supporting the German fascist party, AfD. They supported Milei, and they gave him a loan of $40 billion to help win the election. So you have a fascist government in the United States, which is actually organizing internationally. And you have insurrectionists who are in charge of the legislature, the Supreme Court, and of course, the executive government, Trump. And what have they done? They passed this bill which allowed for a major expansion of fascist force, the ICE, which I would say is a Gestapo type operation where you have no rights and you are terrorizing not only immigrants, but all workers throughout the United States with a budget of $70 billion. So this is a fascist attack on the working class. And I'm glad that the CNA is having a day of action, but all the unions need to unite against ICE, have a national action. And I think that the action in Minneapolis is an example of workers organizing and communities organizing against ICE. These fascists want to get rid of bourgeois democracy. They don't believe in the Constitution. They say that. And the fascist ideology is that, and the techno-fascist is that they should run everything. We don't need a Congress. We don't need checks and balances. And that's what we're moving towards. Now, one of the main factors of the present economic crisis is the fight against China and to blockade China, because China now is a major threat economically to the United States. We can't compete cars with China. We have lost our competitive ability. And what we are doing, what the United States is doing, U.S. imperialism is doing, is saying since we can't compete economically, we're going to militarily invade Venezuela and stop the oil going to China. Tell them that they can't export oil to China. We're going to sanction Cuba and try to destroy the Cuban government. Also, today preparations are for an attack on an invasion on Iran. And one of the purposes of that attack on Iran is to stop Iran from sending oil to China, which is a major supplier of China, Iran. So this inter-imperialist rivalry that we are immediately in is not just about getting rid of this ruler or that ruler. It's about solidifying U.S. economic power and imperial power by actually militarily intervening. But the foundation of that is highly unstable because it's not going to save U.S. imperialism, in my view. One of the other aspects that we have to talk about with the crisis of capitalism is deregulation, because that's an ideology. That's an ideology of the techno-fascist and Trump. Deregulate everything, and including the financial system. The Smoot-Hawley bill was eliminated under Clinton, but they've gone further than that with crypto and elimination of regulation of the banks, really, allowing the banks to speculate. And this is, in my view, going to lead to a crash, a speculation. The speculation of AI, the speculation of the data centers is going to lead to a bubble, which it has, and a crash. And it also has led to a major decline in the US dollar. It was up to $5,500 an ounce at one time. This is like a major lack of confidence of the world capitalists on the US dollar. If we have another economic decline, which we're going to have, which is going to be greater, in my view, than 2008, they can't do what they did in 2008, where they tried to pump things up with trillions of dollars. If they do that, it will lead to a mass hyperinflation in the United States. That will be the reality that the working class faces. So the Democrats have no program. They support capitalism like the Republicans. And the Democrats have not been able to implement any even reforms. For example, the single payer national health care, that's off the table with the Democrats. They want to keep a private healthcare system. The Democrats have also not opposed to AI, regulation of AI. The Democrats have not shut off money to ICE. And if you look at the debate now, the Democrats voted for the military budget, the $1 trillion military budget. It was a bipartisan vote for $1 trillion. So while they don't have money for healthcare and housing and education, they're voting for this imperialist military budget. And of course, we have to fight for workers' control against ICE and against imperialist wars. So and also against repression of journalists. And my union is threatened. Journalists have been arrested. Journalists have been attacked in Minneapolis and throughout the country. Don Lemon and other journalists have been charged, and that is going to grow. That's going to escalate because they want to shut down Democratic, and they want to shut down independent media, but even corporate media that challenges them. MS has had programs on fascism and had voices challenging some of the aspects of capitalism and imperialism. So what we have to do is look to mobilize in a general strike movement. Now, in the United Auto Workers, Sean Fain called for a general strike in 2028. And that was the first time it was raised by a national union that we build towards it. But the reality is we can't wait till 2028. I believe that there's going to be an effort to have martial law, the seizing of the ballots in Georgia and Atlanta, and the use of ICE to terrorize people to vote. They cannot afford an election. The anger at the Republicans mean that they're going to massively lose it. So we have to build a united front for a general strike. And the last general strike was in 1946 in Oakland. And of course, the major strikes in the 30s were in Toledo, Minneapolis, and San Francisco in 1934. Those strikes led to the organization of hundreds of thousands, millions of workers. A general strike today in the United States could lead to millions of workers organizing unions at Walmart, at Amazon, at FedEx. So the capitalists are afraid of a general strike, and I think that's one of the things we have to raise in this general strike. It shouldn't just be about ICE. It needs to be about having a democratic election against threats of a martial law and for single payer and for a fight against AI. It's why AI should be development of technology and AI should be under the control of the working class. That's the kind of program that a Labor Party would bring about. It would fight for a program that would defend the working class. So we have to prepare for martial law and build these united fronts and assemblies and education. I don't believe we're going to reform the Capitalist Party. The Democrats can't stop fascism and imperialist war. And that is why the working class has to organize itself independently for workers' power and control globally. And we have to link up with workers in Mexico, Canada. Our enemies are not around the world, workers around the world. They're not in China. They're not in Venezuela. Our enemies are at home. And I think that one of the things that we have to do is build direct links with workers internationally. They face the same attacks that we have. In fact, privatization, union busting has been organized by the United States in many of these countries, including coups, as I said, in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Guatemala. Many countries of the world have faced an attack on them organized by U.S. multinationals with, unfortunately, the support of the AFL-CIO. So I'm optimistic. I think the working class can wake up, is waking up. And I think Trump and the fascists were shocked by the reaction in Minneapolis. So thank you. Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Thank you, Steve. Yeah, that was super instructive. And hopefully, many of these things will come back up in our discussions because there's a lot to dissect there, and look forward to carrying on the discussion. But our next speaker, she is a historian in CUNY in the Bronx Community College. She is a member of CUNY's Professional Staff Congress, PSC, which is their faculty and staff union at CUNY. Carol has been a long-time activist in the class struggle. He's a founding member of the Labor Education Project on AFL-CIO's international operations. So it seeks to provide resources, educate union members about, and also comprehensively oppose AFL-CIO's collaboration with the US ruling class in their international affairs in the form of both political interventions and sometimes military interventions as well, to upstage workers' movements and progressive movements in other countries, in collaboration, of course, with the CIA and the US government. And Carol is also a member of the United Front Committee for a Labour Party, which we mentioned earlier. Yeah, take us away, Carol.
Well, I really want to thank you for organizing this because Rosa Luxemburg said in the turn of the 20th century, it's either socialism or barbarism. And now, I mean, it's clear that she was correct. The problem is that whenever anybody talks about fascism, they, like, for instance, my union president and the executive officers talk about Trump being a fascist all the time. But if that's the case, if Trump is a fascist, then we should be arming ourselves and we should be preparing for a showdown. Mandani, who's our socialist mayor, calls Trump a fascist and goes down and meets him in Washington and said, we both love New York, and therefore he's not somebody to worry about. Randy Weingarten, who's in charge of the AFT, she writes a book on why fascists, feel that teachers are a threat to fascism. She's done nothing. Her book was so awful, it was unbelievable that there was no and that's the problem with all of them. There's no analysis of what fascism is. And so Randy Weingarten basically her whole book is anecdotal and saying wonderful things about teachers, but there's no plan for any of these people. There's no plan. If somebody is a fascist, that means something. It's not an epithet. It's not you're just a bad guy. A fascist is somebody who wants to murder you, somebody who is a racist, somebody who's a militarist, somebody who wants to, commit genocide and put people in concentration camps. We already see in history what fascists have done. Hitler and Mussolini were good examples. And I mean, this is Mussolini's thing. He wrote a whole thing on fascism. And yet people just use it as an epithet. And I find it infuriating because they don't want to do anything. And, they think that they're exonerated from having to really deal with the question of fascism by just saying that they're fascists. And that's it, as opposed to preparing the working class for the eventuality that people will be put in concentration camps. That when there's a crisis, which there is, and Steve just talked about the crisis in capitalism, that's when the working class really rises up and asserts itself, and which is happening now. As a matter of fact, one of my students this evening said he's finding more and more students who are talking about being on the side of socialism. It's not like a bad thing anymore, as the way it was, in the United States in the 1950s. And so this is a crisis. Capitalism is in a crisis because it can't produce in the way that it used to produce. All it can do is put tariffs on everybody's, especially China, because the United States is in constant competition because its economy is falling apart. And so therefore, all it can do is spend $1 trillion on weapons to not only fight against the Chinese and anybody who's going to, promote their disagreements with the United States and be in competition with the United States, but they said themselves that they're setting up concentration camps across the country. They're buying out warehouses so that they can put not only immigrants, but anybody else who's a dissident. I mean, we see that they didn't have any problem shooting people in Minneapolis and in Los Angeles. So they're not going to have any problem killing more people and putting people in concentration camps. Fascism is not, liberalism. It's not an epithet. It means that the society is in deep crisis. And given the fact that it's in deep crisis, it has to be that the working class is prepared for this crisis, because if the working class isn't prepared for the crisis, the working class is going to have its back up against the wall. It is the fault, absolutely, of the trade union bureaucrats who are miseducating and not even defining what fascism. And my union would never have, thank you, my union would never have anything like this. Randy Weingarten thinks that fascism is just, they're a bunch of bad guys. They say mean things about people. Mamdani, who is our mayor now, has now, not only has he met with Trump, but he also supports our Governor Hochul, who is trying to bust the teachers' strike. Not the teachers, the nurses' strike. She spent $145 million helping the hospitals hire scab workers so that the strike would be broken. And yet Mamdani supports him. And when I said something at a union meeting today about Mamdani, his program was taxing the rich, and he's refusing to go up to a demonstration in Albany that my union is organizing because he doesn't want to oppose Hochul. And so when I said this is terrible that he's not willing to be, oppose Hochul and come to the demonstration up in Albany, the vice president said, well, I think it would be a good idea if he went, but he's playing an inside outside game, whatever that means. And so Mandani just got a pass, and he supported Hochul, who is trying to bust the teachers union. So fascism is a system that under despair, it's under distress, it's falling apart, the economy is a wreck, the environment is a wreck, and it's going to get a whole lot worse when he ends up, deregularizing, all of the conditions for water, for air, for it's going to pollute the planet even more than he already is because he's clearly pro-capitalist. The difference, though, let me just say one other thing, and then the difference. One of the things that is significant about fascism, as opposed to some just military coup in some country where, I've been in places where the military was standing in front of banks with machine guns and letting people know, you better not try to steal anything here, but it still wasn't a fascist society. Fascism employs these squadristi type people who are in Italy, the SS, and now it's ICE. These people are like gendarmes. They're dangerous. They're absolutely lower middle class types of people who are perfectly happy to pull a trigger at any moment. There's absolutely no discourse in terms of a fascist society that we can see that's happening in the United States. All academic freedom is being stepped on in the United States. People are being fired from their jobs. People who are tenure are being fired from their jobs, who are saying anything about Palestine, for instance. Four people from my job were let go. Three of them got their job back. They were adjuncts, but the other one is still in limbo somewhere. So you're not, in fact, the chancellor of the city university has accepted the IHRA definition of anti-Semitism, which is the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. And so not only has he accepted that, which means that anybody who wants to say anything about Palestine is in jeopardy of losing their jobs, but he himself has set up a portal that anybody in New York who doesn't like somebody from CUNY can make a complaint anonymously to the city university about that particular person. There is absolutely no due process. There's no freedom of speech. There's subterfuge. It's really pretty incredible. And people are walking around really fearful of saying anything, which is another hallmark of fascism, of criticizing the government or criticizing anybody or the powers that be. Their attitude essentially is that we need to, which is what they did in Germany and Italy, was burn books. They would have these festivals where people would take books that were about Marxism, about communism, written by Jews, written by labor people, and burn them. And essentially that's happening in the United States. It's not as glaring, but on the shelves of many of the libraries, books are being taken off those shelves now. So they're not being burnt, but they're being taken away. So the discussion of politics and what's going on in the United States and what's going on with Trump is one that's completely curtailed by the administration of CUNY. Not everybody is exactly the same, but that is something that the American government is fostering, the inability to have conversations about anything. And try to talk about Cuba and about the whatchamacallit, the blockade of Cuba. You're going to be chastised for supporting a communist country, and whether you think it's communist or not. I mean, we in the United Front Committee, we defend Cuba against American imperialism, whatever people's positions are on the state of Cuba. And so there's no counterbalance to the powers that be at this point. Trump has controls the state. I would argue that this is not a completely fascist country yet, because even though the Squadrisi, which is an embodiment of ICE, is trying to go around killing people every time they say something, there is an uprising. I mean, you could see that in Minneapolis and, across the country. People are pissed off. They're saying things. If it was a completely fascist country, which I expect there will be, when the situation arises, when the economy completely collapses, I agree with Steve that it's with the Bitcoin and with the tariffs, and China is well in advance of the United States technologically. I think war is inevitable. In fact, the United States is now talking about bombing Iran. And I mean, this is a region where everybody is really up in arms. And so, just to sort of conclude, I think that, unless the working class organizes not only a general strike, which we must do in order to stop this from growing, but the working class has to take power, because the Mussolini's doctrine on fascism really talks about, it's interesting. I mean, Trump isn't even as good a fascist, I don't think, as Mussolini was. I mean, he was much more in sync and much more intelligent than Trump. I mean, he tried to find ways of at least saying, not really doing, but at least saying that he was going to ameliorate the problems that working class people are finding. And he said, come into our fascist party. We're going to have a party for everybody. We're going to make sure that the capitalists aren't, ripping everybody off. We're going to make sure that if you're a working class person, you'll get your needs met. So, the fascists are there in order to keep things sort of at bay and keep things under control. And the only way to do that is using the Squadrisi ultimately to do that, or I should say ICE, to do that. But their intention is to try to, at least to some extent, the Aryans in Germany, the people who support Mussolini in Italy, these people were able to get, they call themselves socialists. I mean, that's the name of their party, the Workers' Party. So Hitler ends up nationalizing all of the Jewish property and giving it to his supporters, so that you see their socialism, because we're redistributing the wealth. The problem is that we're going to end up in I think another world war, because the crisis is so extreme. There's really no working ourselves through this crisis. And the only way to do that really is, as Rosa Luxemburg said, there's socialism or barbarism. And anything short of that is going to be world war. And so fascism, has to be talked about by the union leadership in a way that they will organize a program that's going to fight the fascists. But with the union leadership that we have, they're not willing to fight the fascists, because basically they're more afraid of the working class than they are of, and communism, than they are of the fascists. And the Social Democratic Party, or I asked a friend of mine to come on a demonstration with me, and she said, the Social Democrats killed Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, which is in fact the case. So they have to go. We need a leadership that's going to be communist and that's willing to fight against capitalism. So that's.
Thank you, Carol. And again, we'll definitely keep discussing a lot of these points after we have wrapped up our contributions. So with that, our next speaker is Gabriel Prawl. So Gabriel is a past president of Local 52 of the International Longshore Workers Union. So ILWU, for those who are unfamiliar, has a very long history of working class internationalism and using their union power to oppose wars, imperialism, and apartheid. And Gabriel, through his life's work as a trade unionist, is very much a part of this legacy. So he joined ILW Local 19 and went to become the chair of their education committee and executive board member. He has worked with anti-apartheid and anti-imperialist labor unionists like Leo Robinson, and he transferred to Local 52 and went on to become their first ever African-American president. He's also Seattle chapter president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which links the struggles for workers' rights and civil rights, and works to extend democracy to the disenfranchised and build the power of poor and working people. And he's also a representative of the Million Workers March movement, which was started by rank and file people in ILW Local 10. And we're very glad to have him. Gabriel, take us away.
Thank you very much for that great introduction. It's a pleasure being here to discuss the issue of what workers are experiencing here in the U.S. today. You know, as we move forward, and we can remember that this administration, when they first came into power, the first thing they did was attack DEI, attack Black workers, union workers. And I got to say that when you talk to most Black people that as we celebrate Black History Month, they're not new to this type of oppression, because Black people come from the history of shadow slavery. So when it comes to dealing with what's going on today, it's not new. They felt the pain, and I know America as a whole is feeling the pain. You know, one of the things that I have to say, that's why I want to clarify that I'm sitting here as the Seattle co-chair of the Million Worker March, because by being the president of the A. Philip Randolph Institute, which is a constituency group of the AFL-CIO, I don't want to put in a position where I'm speaking on behalf of an organization that's part of the AFL-CIO. And the reason I'm saying this, because I start in April 25th, 2025, we organized a rally, and that was the same day that they was doing the No Kings rally. We organized a separate rally that marched to the detention center in Seattle, federal detention center in Seattle. And it was very successful, got a big turnout, and that led to the call of a town hall that took place in November. In fact, let me retract myself. The action at this the No King's Day was the 5th of April. No, the 15th of November, we scheduled a town hall event in the MLK Labor Council building. The intent was to invite rank and file members to speak in their own name. Officers and union leaders was welcome to come, but they did not show up. We had a full house and great discussion about where do we go from here, because the theme of the town hall was, where do we go from here? And that's coming from following the 1967 speech by Dr. King. By the way, Dr. King was a member of ILW Local 10. He was my union brother. We celebrate him every year. And Dr. King in 1967, at a speech at the Southern Christian Leaders Conference, and also a book that he wrote, he asked the question, where do we go from here? And what Dr. King was trying to say about where do we go from here, he was talking about the after the victory of the 1964 Act on the 1965 Voting Rights Act. He wanted to know that where do the movement is going next, you know? And Dr. King was talking about what came next. He was talking about economic justice, poverty, and deeper systemic issue. Dr. King was against the war in Vietnam. Let's be clear about that, because at that time, that's what we were dealing with. And he was talking about the deeper, the deeper systemic issue in America that we was dealing with. And that's what we got today. It didn't change. We still continue to live up to that with this administration. We got to remember that this administration is now in power, put together a plan, Project 2025. This is what they are exercising. This is a capitalist white supremacy plan, was to take over America and not only take over, but drain the economy of working people so they can proceed to go back to what capitalist is in America prior to the Reconstruction. Now, when we did this event, this town hall, one of the things that the town hall was all about is strategizing, organizing, and working to have a response to what Americans are dealing with today. This happened, this organizing and plan was before the action that took place in Minnesota. And you know what? At that event, we scheduled to do an event on Dr. King's Day, at Dr. King's, at a workshop. We did a workshop at Dr. King's Day in Seattle. And basically, that workshop was bringing people together, trying to bring union people together. We had a great turnout in union people. And we talked about things that people can do. You see, one of the things that we made clear that we as workers can do one of the most powerful, one of the most effective, one of the most strategic action, non-violence action, I should say, one of the most non-violence action that will make a difference in this country by stopping some of the oppression that's happening to our citizens. And that's the action to exercise one of the most powerful things that a worker can do. And that's the general strike, hold back their labor. But we didn't say that this, we say plan, we say work on, and I got to be, I'm not going to be silent because silence is complicit. So I'm going to speak the fact and the truth. There was retaliation against me after that by leadership of AFL-CIO in our state. And one of the things that happened, they said, we were inciting violence. Some union leaders was upset because they say they was under the no strike clause and what we doing can make people lose their jobs and all this every negative stuff that you can say to oppose the fact that we have the power to stop the things that are happening in this country. And it didn't stop there. I received all kind of calls, invited to all kind of Zoom. The people that was pushing this was getting support from other leaders out of the state because they wanted to quiet me from having that conversation. You see, in our conversation, we made it clear. Everybody can do something. If you cannot strike, you can call in sick. You can don't shop. One of the things that when I remember when Target make the action against DEI and Black people, there was a big action that the defund Target, the Black communities or the Black people in America stopped shopping in Target, and it hit them real hard. That was the real example of the power that workers have or people have to put those that are complicit, those that are donating, those that are putting money into this ICE operation to feel the pain. Not the workers, not those that are planning to try to change things. But labor says, okay, we already got plan. We already got rapid response. We already have know your rights. Well, if we look at Minnesota, Minneapolis, we saw rapid response observers being killed. So that didn't do anything. When we look at the No Kings rally, millions of people turn out, but it didn't change anything. We continue to see the same thing happening. In fact, it escalated. So at one point, we reached to the ultimate thing that a worker can do and a community can do as a people can do. You see, when Dr. King said, where do we go from here? He said, community or chaos. And what he meant by that, he meant either we come together as a community or we allow them to divide us and just create chaos. So, what we want to do is build a community on strength. Is this tough? It's not easy because of the division that this administration is creating, the fear that they're inflicting on workers and community, the idea of ICE running all over the place, kidnapping people. All of this is happening in front of our face. And we have the power to change that. We do. We just look back on history. We look back at history and the action that workers took. The civil rights and labor rights in the same fight. And the civil rights learn how to fight by watching the labor movement. We're talking about the sit-in action that the auto workers did back in 1930, I believe. These are influential stuff that power that workers have that they can use to make change. But we have a big issue right now. The issue is the labor movement not taking the forefront. Workers want the labor movement to be in front. Community wants the labor movement to lead. And you have to wonder, why are they silent? And then when you look at the idea of they don't want to get the benefit cut, when I say benefit, they all receive funding at some point. And this administration has been very straight, attacking and taking away funding from any institution that tries to mobilize and educate people of how to respond to this issue. But we cannot stay silent. We cannot sit back and think things are going to change. It's not going to change. We got the Democratic Party today hoping that the November election, 2026 November election, that we were able to take over the House and the Senate and change things. On the other hand, we have this Trump administration trying to start a war to make sure there's no election. Why are these conversations not happening? Why are we just waiting to see what's next? We already know what's next. Why is labor so afraid of having a conversation? This is a conversation. This is not an action, because the workers and the people are not ready for a general strike yet. General strike is not an overnight thing. It's something you have to plan, work on. And at the way we doing, at the way we planning, we should be working on that very, very final action that could change the dynamic of what we're dealing with today. I'm glad I'm part of a great union that has a motto that says, an injury to one is an injury to all. I mean, this is all our fight. Everybody's in it. This is no exception. Labor could play whatever role they want to play to hold back, hoping they got the answer. But I don't criticize anything that labor has done. Rapid response, know your rights, immigrant organization that helping people. We should be all part of all of that. For them, they all should be also part of setting the word to educate people if we have to go into a general strike. This is no one-sided thing. This is all, everybody in, everything in, even the kitchen sink. I got grandkids, I got kids. Sitting back here and saying, follow whatever the AFL-CIO says is not comfortable to me, because my kids and my grandkids' future is at stake. And I'm not going to sit down and not stand up and do something or not say something. It is my responsibility to do that. It is all of our responsibility to be involved and included in this struggle. You know, we have Dr. King stood up against the war in Vietnam, and he got killed. Dr. King was not a dreamer. He was a revolutionary. And that's a fact. And he had a revolutionary agenda. Dr. King was not part of the Democratic Party or the Republican Party when he got killed, because they separated themselves from Dr. King because of his position against the war in Vietnam. So let's not get it wrong. Let's not mistake. We can't say that we are for the people, but then we ain't willing to take the ultimate sacrifice that Dr. King took. We ain't going to resolve this. Let's put it this way. This is not going to be resolved by being silent. It's not going to be resolved by being quiet. And it's not going to end unless it's a major action by all the people in this country to understand that we have to come together to make this change. We have to come together to build a future. Otherwise, these I would say parasites that are draining the working class taxpayers will continue to go, because that's what I call the capitalists. Those that are oppressing us today. I wanted to say some nasty word, but I'm not gonna do it right now. But the fact remains is that we as a people need to come together. We as a people need to understand that we don't pass the stage of reasoning. We don't pass the stage of standing up. We pass the stage of marching. We pass the stage of protesting. We're not going nowhere with that. It's okay to do it, but it's not the effective thing that's going to end this. We know that, we see it happening. But one thing we know for a fact is a general strike will shut this country down, and we will get people to act and react in a different way. And I'm not going to take too much time because I want to leave time for question. So I'll stop right here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriel. Indeed, yeah, as you put it, we need to throw the kitchen sink at this. We need to figure something out and fast. And finally, so for our last speaker, we have Russ Bellant, who is with us at Stony Brook. And yeah, you can see him now. So Russ is a Detroiter who grew up in Illinois. He was a safety committeeman in the United Steelworkers for 14 years, a chief steward in AFT for 5 years, and statewide education director in the operating engineers for 7 years. And now he's retired. He co-founded the Anti-Fascist Organizing Coalition in Detroit when Trump was inaugurated 13 months ago. It's been 13 months. Okay. He also co-founded Detroiters for Tax Justice to stop billionaire looting from property taxes for our schools and libraries. He has written 3 books on fascist organizing, of which the best known is Old Nazis, the New Right in the Republican Party. So, Russ, you have the floor.
Thank you, Local 1104. Thank you, Steve Zeltzer. I'm happy to come from Detroit to talk with you what I think is a pioneering effort in the labor movement to start the discussion that needs to be started. We saw just this week that Donald Trump, through one of his agencies, has told agencies to not negotiate contracts with the AFG, with the American Federation of Government Employees, which is 820,000 membership. And basically, they're going to try to break the federal workers union. And so this is why he's spending $35 billion on concentration camps, crippling the National Labor Relations Board, and align with Elon Musk as he plans to build a robotized workforce to replace workers. That's just my welcoming remarks. The key to fighting fascism is to know what it is, and some of the speakers have touched on that. It started, as you know, I think, with Italian fascism, the Fasci, in as early as 1921. They were actually doing marches even before that. But they started by attacking the agricultural workers of Italy through what they called the squadristi. They were the black shirts, the terror element of the fascist party, even prior to it taking state power. And they went in and they burned farmers' cooperatives and they killed the leaders of the cooperatives. This is prior to the 2022 March on Rome. The industrialists were the new emerging capitalist sector from agrarian Italy. And they inspired, sponsored, and organized fascism as a means of responding to working class organizing, to crush the unions, to crush the political parties, and crush the strikes. And the squadristi were employed on the industrial workers after Mussolini took state power. They were very explicit that this was to tame the working class. It wasn't about glorifying Italy, or it wasn't about some other thing about some historic fact. They were very explicit. We've got to tame the working class and exploit them. Squadristi were expanded and they went to trade union meetings and beat and killed people. On strikes, they invaded the strike activities and sites. They murdered and beat people on strike, workers on strike. They implemented it when they had state power, death sentences on leaders that inspired strikes as enemies of the state. The Nazi labor front in Germany was analogous in these matters. They put statutory death sentences if your standard of conduct was not completely submissive to the employers and you were less than silent on the issues. The Labor Front was called the Fascist, or the National Socialist Labor Front, was actually created by the employers. The so-called unions and the locals were sponsored by the employer class, and they set the terms and conditions of existence in the plants. As it evolved, workers had no choice as to where they worked. They couldn't say, oh, I'm quitting here and going there. That wasn't allowed. Workers were, again, put in complete submission. And this gave power to the capitalist class that seek to exploit their labor unconditionally. That was the founding and central mission of fascism. In its creation and empowerment, there were what others, and I'm in concurrence with these others, three features of what fascism was. One, of course, was one-man rule. Two was creation of a cadre to enforce the terror and the dismantling of opposition to the capitalist class. And three was, of course, the emerging capitalist sector that funds and creates, inspires in their own name, the fascist solution for monopolizing power in the workplace and in society. And when a reference was made to Mayor Mandamni meeting with Trump, and one of the reporters who were present said to the mayor-elect, you called Trump a fascist. Do you still call him a fascist? And before he could answer, Trump said, that's okay. You can call me a fascist. I'm a fascist, right? So, there's no confusion on that. But what are the three factors of fascism as they apply in the United States? And that's what I really want to focus on. On the one-man rule, I don't think there's any confusion or any head scratching about what that is in the United States today. When he says Congress should become a ceremonial function, ignore the courts, they have to take orders from me, destroy independent media voices, etc. We're all up on that. But the creation of cadre, obviously it started with the militias, the Proud Boys, etc. in January 6th, where it manifested itself when they followed the orders to stand by if he didn't win the election. But it's expanded now. I want to touch on what I think is a deeply ignored manifestation of the creation of the terror cadre. And this is a 2024 book published in July of 2024, written by the main writer was actually Jack Posobiec. And this book is titled Unhumans. And this book says that if you believe in fairness and equality, you're an unhuman, not a subhuman, an unhuman that must be crushed. That must be crushed. This book spends 4 chapters on examples of 20th century dictators that used mass murder to crush their opposition. Francisco Franco, Augusto Pinochet, Ian Smith of apartheid Rhodesia, and Chiang Kai-shek, who invaded Formosa and did mass murder to get rid of opposition to his occupation. The book is virtually unknown on the left, and it's unknown in the commercial media. It's known in MAGA, where it's a bestseller. So when you see ICE out there violently attacking people, pulling people down, beating them, tear gassing people who even dare to speak to them. And of course, committing murder. And then the next day, you see ICE agents relishing that and saying, oh, you haven't learned your lesson from yesterday when we killed Alex Prexley? You haven't learned your lesson yet? Where do you think they're getting that inspiration? They believe these folks and us are unhumans and that we have to be crushed. Regarding the leading capitalist sector in the United States, it's not General Motors anymore. It's not what we used to call Chrysler, which has gone through several variations, etc. It's big tech. And big tech is the leading capitalist sector for creating mass change in the structure of power in the United States and beyond. A piece by Michael Brock, who was an executive in a senior executive in a big tech, has really summarized that. And I put copies on the table here, and I'd be happy to send it to anybody who's on this program, the piece that he did. But basically, big tech was exemplified by Elon Musk paying $250 million to get Donald Trump elected under the condition that they made J.D. Vance the vice presidential candidate. So that's how he got that job. And then he, in turn, was given permission to strip assets out of the databases of all the federal agencies. And for those who haven't heard, that was put into the database of Palantir, owned by Peter Thiel, the largest private spy agency in the world and a major CIA contractor for many, many years. And Peter Thiel is the person who is probably in the vanguard of, but not by himself at all, in the vanguard of saying, we have to get past constitutional society. There is no freedom. The people with the money must make the decisions and not be complicated by these masses. Their actual vision, as Michael Brock has articulated with great knowledge, and is to create domains. You know, the Constitution goes, the concept of citizenship goes, it's over with. And they create domains where local money, the state governments, all that. They create domains where the moneyed elites rule and citizens reside in the domain under contractual relationship. This is what we call neo-serfdom, neo-feudalism. These are the people who are in the vanguard of big tech today. So when they're building the data centers, these little data centers all over the United States, that's their advancement of distributing the data that they've collected and building profiles on citizenship and monitoring their financial transactions through their credit card data, through phone records, through all sorts of data, so to have a profile on every citizen in this country. The opposition to data centers is mostly focused on the environmental issues. I've argued at home and anywhere I can that the fundamental issue is the usage of the data centers. I found out recently that one of them that is being pushed and forced in my area in the suburbs of Detroit, the contractor who's building it is really is being a front for Palantir. Data centers have to be fought with the same ferocity as ICE. And make sure people need to read this Michael Brock article. Feel free to take a couple to share with friends so that people understand what we're talking about here. The other element that I want to bring in, by us not looking at big tech with that scope of understanding without knowing about the plan for mass murder. Oh, let me say this about Unhumans. Jack Proceviak is a longtime friend of Donald Trump. Southern Poverty Law Center said he's a white supremacist and a Nazi. But that, you know, that's good calling cards as far as Donald Trump's concerned. But this book supporting this mass murder is endorsed by J.D. Vance. It's endorsed by Donald Trump Jr. It's endorsed and co-published by Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson. So we're talking about the inner world of Trump. So where are they going with us not having this level of knowledge of what they're working on and what they're doing? And, you know, not really looking and acknowledging that actual operating terror that they put even on their Republicans in the Senate who deviate and they start threatening their families, their lives are threatened, them and their families, and they get right back in line. So we have a strong operating one-man rule activity here. But what we're missing is that Trump is not focusing on this just for the United States. Trump is building what I'll call it, and so you can take it for what it's worth. This is my interpretation. He's building a Fourth Reich. If you see what he's doing in Europe, his demands to take Greenland, his demands to take Canada, and unite the white world under his BPEO, his Board of Peace, which he's supposed to give him lifetime rule and interaction and supplant the United Nations. The earlier reference in our conversation here with the building of the fascist parties in Europe in response to the migration, Trump has been pushing and coalition with them, the remigration conferences, to start build a mass consensus in the population, and it's succeeding, to expel the non-white people who've migrated into Europe. The remigration conferences were resisted by the French government and the German government, and the State Department website in the spring did an extensive attack on these governments that said that the Western parliamentary parties, I'm not quoting now, but characterized the Western parliamentary parties are a threat to Western civilization because they're allowing migration in their country. They're a threat to Western civilization, and they're a threat to the U.S. national security. And they praised the neo-Nazi AfD party on the State Department website. And this was up for a long time. They praised the National Rally, the fascist party. The remigration conference that was eventually held was sponsored under the auspices of the Fascist Party of Italy, under Salvini, the deputy. Vox Party has grown. The AfD is now the largest single party in Germany, if I'm recalling correctly, in the polls. And it's only the coalition that exists now of multiple parties that is keeping them from ruling Germany. National Rally is teetering on the edge of taking France under its wings. The new fascist party that was formed in Portugal, I think in the memory of Salazar, probably, the new fascist party of Portugal in its first election got 33% of the vote.
And the presidency.
So this remigration is big. And of course, in Poland, there were elections where Trump's allies of Trump won power. And it's spreading in other parts in Eastern Europe as well. So this Fourth Reich is his agenda, and it's not about the United States for him. It's about the world, because that's the scope of war, the big tech being a global power. Palantir has a contract brought by the Labour Party of England to for their military and intelligence reorganization, studies and evaluation. Palantir, of course, is also big in the Pentagon, as well as the CIA, if I'm recalling correctly, the Pentagon. And so we have a much deeper structural fight and more necessity for building international solidarity. And also, you know, again, as I mentioned it back, them now taking on working class organizations starting with this AFG, which they've been threatening before, and with the Labor Relations Board. And so as we organize, I just want to say, and I feel I'm leaving some stuff out because there's so much to say. Well, I'll just say this very briefly. The other allies they have, primarily in the United States, is a Christian Reformed Evangelical Church headed by Doug Wilson, whose foremost, best known element is Peter Hegseth and his crowd. Peter Hegseth, secretary of this. This group is the leading advocate for ending the U.S. Constitution and creating a right-wing, theocratic, hardline society ruled by, you know, his type. His type is Doug Wilson. Doug Wilson wrote a book saying that slavery was good for everybody. Can you hear big tech clapping in the background? This guy is emerging in power. He was just brought into the Pentagon to do a worship service, according to the Washington Post. They did a story on it, had pictures. There's, and the reason I'm putting them in here, though, is Peter Hegseth. They have a big school network, K-12 schools, about 400 of them, I think. They're growing fast. And they said, Peter Hegseth said twice, and one of them was just after he was nominated, this was aired, after he was nominated Secretary of Defense, that we are organizing an underground army for insurrection to overthrow the system. And the podcasters talked about how his schools were the base, the boot camps, which Peter Hegseth accepted. So this network is organizing it. That big add-on, and I'm going to bring this to a close. The big add-on to this now is that Turning Point USA is working with CREC to build these schools all over the country. And if you're paying, you know, a little attention to what's going on with that, they're pushing to build Turning Point into a huge mass base by even stay in the state of Texas. The governor is saying every high school has to be allowed to have, every high school has to have a Turning Point chapter. And he put $1 million fund together to help the campaign and threatened any school that tried to inhibit the organization of these chapters in every high school. Oklahoma's doing this. I think Missouri is, but it wasn't come from the governor, it come from the legislature, and Florida, I believe, was the other one. Yeah, DeSantis, lack of sanity, yeah. So Turning Point is being built. At the same time, they're working with theocracy agenda to indoctrinate cadres of children for generations into a theocratic, post-constitutional, anti-democratic society. And there is absolutely no resistance whatsoever in education that's fighting the religious right takeover of education in the K-12 range. And that's a failure that needs to be overcome. And I also want to remind people the Heritage Foundation was founded by the anti-union corps in the early 1970s, about 1973. So any rate, if you want literature sent to you, you're online. Just take my name, put the two words together and add gmail.com. Let me know what you want and I'll send it. And I have a few books I've written on this subject in the past, and I'll send those too. Nothing's for cost. Happy to sit down and take questions. Thank you.